Real men aren't meant to be vulnerable. Real men are fearless, go-getters. Real men have no worries about their bodies. Real men need to worry about self-love. Real men are super successful, and real men don't cry. That was the love of my life. That was the person for me. I didn't let it happen. I didn't let it work because I was so caught up in being financially stable, being a provider.
On today's episode, men's therapeutic coach, bibliotherapist, and author, Alex Holmes. Alex.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
Tell me a little bit about what you do.
Okay, so it's kind of consistently developing, but I'm an existential therapeutic coach. I'm a trainee psychotherapist. So I work within existential philosophy and psychotherapy.
My favorite.
To help people find their purpose, their meaning, and move through those really debilitating anxieties in life. I'm usually working with people in liminal moments, so moving through transitions, whether that be starting a family, leaving a family, starting a new job, leaving a job, going into adulthood, maturation, and those kinds of areas is typically where I tend to work a lot of the time. My focus is quite specifically men, but I do work with everybody. But I work with a lot of men and their anxieties and their mental health and their well-being. And one of my modalities is bibliotherapy. So I mean, alongside all of the other kind of ways of working therapeutically, I think my love of books kind of pushes into that space as well. And so I'm a trainee psychotherapist, therapeutic coach. I use bibliotherapy as a way of connecting and getting people to connect with their mental health and their well-being as well. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
I have about 1,000 questions at the back of that.
Oh my God, go for it.
So first of all, let's delve deeper into the bibliotherapy.
Mm-hmm.
Before I met you or connected with you, I hadn't really heard about the term.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me more about what it is and how did you find it?
So what it is, it's an age-old idea. It's an age-old term. I think it's one of the earliest forms of therapy. People would, if we go back to ancient times or ancient wisdom, like Stoicism and the like, going back, even some areas of Buddhism and those sorts of philosophies and ideas, a lot of people would provide books or provide reading as a way of helping people deal with their mental health experiences or their challenges in life. I think as humans, we are quite prone to stepping into forms of media, forms of culture to help us understand ourselves better. Over time, it's developed. So, in more recent times, it's been more, when I say more recent, I'm talking about like 20th century sorts of time. It was around librarians giving recommendations to people that come into the library. Oh, I've just gone for a breakup. What can you help me with? And they'll be like, oh, there's this book that's quite popular. Let's come in. Booksellers are super important in bookstores. When you go into a bookshop and you're looking for a specific book, you can't necessarily put your finger on what it is that you want or what you're looking for. The booksellers are the ones that will be like, right, here are some of the books that I love, and this might be what you need. So it's been a kind of been a thing that we passed down through human tradition for a long time. I've always had this idea that books aren't necessarily meant to be kept; they're meant to be passed on, because it was the primary way of passing knowledge, of passing communication, passing information. And so I'm big on just saying, like, here's this book, go away, come back, and let's have a discussion about it, because I think there's so many different ways that authors can communicate particular ideas to the readers, and there's so many benefits that we can get from them. And the second part of your question, what was your second part?
At the back of that, I'm just thinking, so our book, for example, librarians and bookstore sellers, are they classified as bibliotherapists?
Not necessarily. I think it's kind of, in a sense, it's moved into an area of art therapy. Because the way that a lot of people, if we take a step back, a lot of art therapists don't necessarily use it in the same way they use drama therapy or dance therapy or other art therapies.
It's a more common introspective type of.
Yeah. Because books, you've got to look at, there are considerations with all those other art therapies too, but with books, it can take a long time. It can take a while for people to kind of get through certain concepts. We have to take into consideration ability and neurodivergence as well. So the different
Talk to
ways
me on
of
that,
people.
yeah.
Yeah.
Today's episode is brought to you by everyone's favorite kombucha, Momo. Aside being a super healthy and delicious drink that I enjoy having, the reason why I wanted to partner with Momo is the story behind it. A family-owned business, locally brewed and handmade, Momo is the fruit of the hard work of Josh and Lisa, who both quit their corporate jobs in order to create something they believed would create a good impact in the world. When I visited their brewery and saw with how much care each bottle was prepared and how much each one of their team members enjoyed working there and believed in their mission, I knew that that's the type of people that I want to work with. Check out their website for more information and use the discount code IsThisIt15 to get the 15% off of your first order.
So if you've got ADHD, you may not necessarily be able to concentrate so much, in the way that you interpret, the books might
Which
be
is
very
the
different.
classic example of people that say, I can't read a book.
Exactly. And then you've got dyslexia, you've got dyspraxia, you've got all of these different neurological types, which means that interacting with a book could be very difficult and very different for you. So when I'm considering offering a book to people, I'm always like, okay, so what is your experience with reading? What kind of things do you like to read? What kind of how do you get on with it? Some people just fall asleep with reading. Some people just do not pay attention. Some people can't get past the first page. Some people can just devour a book but not take too much meaning from it, etc. So there's different ways, and working, especially when I'm working with young boys and whatnot, a lot of boys come to reading a lot later than girls statistically. But what I found,
why is that?
Just because of, I want to say it's socialization, but I also think it's because of the way boys' brains develop. There's been an argument which I'm kind of still reading around, so forgive me if it's a bit woolly when I say it, but there's an argument for boys to start school later because of the way that their brains develop. It's kind of where a lot of boys are being put at a disadvantage in the schooling system, which means that a bit more physically engaged, like socially as well. That whole idea of introspection is not necessarily afforded to a lot of boys. I think boys can be quite introspective, but over time they're going to get pushed into more external modes of communication and experiencing. Typically, obviously there are outliers and everybody is the same. It depends on the experience you have with that level of masculinity and whatnot. But what I found is that there are quite a few boys who really enjoy reading, but they enjoy that through graphic novels.
The comic books.
The comic books, but when graphic novels have that level, that still in-depth story, still kind of level of,
but a little bit more engaging visually.
So they can kind of really get into the story and be part of the action and whatnot. So again, there's things like that, trying to find the right book to give somebody and to engage with. Because if I walked into a school tomorrow and just being like, okay guys, here, let's start talking about, Of Mice and Men, for example, let's pick up, and it might be very difficult for a lot of people to connect with, because they're just like, oh, books can be intimidating. I was listening to the radio, I think last year, and they were talking about the, white working class boys falling behind in a lot of different areas in school, and boys falling behind in literacy, and black boys falling behind in literacy. It's like there was a lot of falling behinds. And a teacher came on and she said, I think she was a head teacher, but I think it was a parents' evening she was at, and she was walking around because head teachers just like want to be there, be seen, be present, start meeting the parents and whatnot. And she overheard a conversation with a teacher talking to one of her pupils' fathers, and like, he's really good at reading, and but it'd be good if he kind of kept up because it's important, and he's doing well. And then I think his dad said something along the lines of, that's not something that that he should be doing. He's a boy, he's not a girl, X, Y, and Z. I don't want him to grow up being soft, X, Y, and Z, and all this different stuff.
Soft?
Yeah, soft.
From reading?
Exactly. So, spending your time, and there's this stereotype with reading, especially with men, that it's when you have too much time on your hands, you shouldn't be spending time daydreaming.
Oh.
If you read, you're soft, it's an effeminate activity. You should be outside working, should be doing all this stuff, And of course, that's a very kind of Victorian idea. It's an idea that's kind of permeated through our, culture for a long time. And it's just transformed. So even like when we go into a bookstore now, if I go into the young adult area, a lot of it is targeted at teenage girls. If you're going to find specific books for teenage boys, it's quite, very specific and very few and far between. Big areas like crime fiction are big for men, but again, it's very specific kind of fiction. It's not like, it's leaning into the masculine archetypes of the characters, the Jack Reachers, the Alex Crosses, the people that are like ex-military police and they have to go and like find somebody.
What about books like Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings? Those are kind of universal, I think, gender-wise.
Yeah, they are. And I was having a conversation about Harry Potter recently. We're looking around the themes within it, how it works through a boy's, if you think about it in this angle, but it works through a boy's psyche all the way towards the end. Because you've read Harry Potter?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Big fan.
Yeah, 25-year-old book. I'm not spoiling anything here. People know. But if the core thing around Harry's development is magic, magic is blood magic, and it's love, and it's the love that his mum kind of gave up for him, so that he could be protected towards throughout his life. If that's the core idea, love, he couldn't be told that from the very beginning of the book, because even when at the end of the Philosopher's Stone and he asked Dumbledore, he's like, oh, I could touch him but you couldn't touch me and all this different stuff. Dumbledore had to couldn't tell him everything straight away. But when you think about when you're a boy and you're 11, conversations around love and that sort of idea around introspection and romance and sacrifice and that level of compassion, and considering Harry's just come from a compassionless household growing up, he never had that. So he was devoid of all of these things inside of him, and it took 7 years for him to find those true understandings of what it meant for him internally, to find love, to find friendship, to find family, to find community, to feel like he's not alone, to find the courage, to find to have true compassion for people as he grew into who he was as an adult. And there were elements of the book which are heavily stereotyped based on the way that the time for when it was written and whatnot. But Hermione is the reader, is the one that is the all knowledgeable. Not all knowledgeable, but she's the reader. She's the sensitive. She can be the sensitive one, and she can. She was the, and that's that could have been looked at as quite a stereotypical way of writing a girl in the books. So just like various different things, but to attract a boy to read that is good, that could work. But I suppose like it's getting somebody interested in that reading.
So how do we destigmatize reading for men?
I'd
never actually, honest truth, I'd never thought about it that way. I never even thought that was a thing, that it is somehow shameful or embarrassing or not cool for guys and boys to read.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily destigmatizing reading, it's destigmatizing reading for pleasure and reading for internal kind of connection and whatnot, because men, but they will read things
but
like
it's work related,
work related, business related, non-fiction. That's typically what men read. They'll read to learn something. They'll read if they need to understand something, and then once they get the information, that'll be it, sort of thing. I went on TikTok the other day and I was just like, oh, books for men, just to see what people were talking about. And it was just literally books around Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie.
To be fair, that's all of my library.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But again, there was like no books on fiction. There were no young adult fiction books. There were not even the crime fiction books. There weren't even any of those. I was like, how are those the books that you are kind of pushing for men to read, but not the books that kind of show you how to live in the world and what that looks like? So I guess destigmatizing that is just being, just having people be more courageous around kind of getting boys to reading and kind of making it an activity that boys would enjoy doing. That looks like, having more role models that are reading. Again, statistically, more women than men read.
I think it's very attractive when you see a person read, whoever it is, female, male. It just shows that they have carved out that time for themselves, that they're educating themselves, it's that they're practicing mindfulness in a way, so it's beautiful.
Yeah, and that's literally what I came to when I was like, I've got like I practice mindfulness. I write a lot. I do a lot of introspective things. Obviously I'm trained in this kind of area, in this kind of helping profession, which again, more and more men are declining in that area as well. And I was thinking, like, books are very important as a way of creating that inner dialogue for ourselves, being able to understand someone's psychology, a point of view, building empathy. And if boys don't read often or intentionally, as when I say intentionally, I mean like outside of what they have to do for their English GCSE or A level or whatnot, it kind of creates this empathy gap between boys and girls, and then eventually men and women.
So you attribute that empathy gap to not reading?
I think reading is it plays a huge part in that. Emotional literacy, compassionate understanding, just general ideas of what it means to be another person, what it looks like to be in somebody else's shoes, and understanding that.
Interesting.
So, again, like, there is an argument to say, men should read more books written by women about women to understand what women go through or what women have gone through in history. There has been a lot of pushback by obviously certain men to be like, oh, why do that sort of thing? But again, do that. Because women, like, in the conversations I'm having, a lot of women would read books written by men. My book. So my book is Time to Talk: How Men Think About Love and Belonging and Connection. A lot more women have read that book.
And is it your thoughts, or is it conversations with your clients or people that you've...
Conversations with clients, conversations with people that have read the book, people that have come to me and said, I've read the most people that have come to me and said, I've read your book, I love it, are women who have read it and then bought it for their partners, brothers, cousins, friends, sons, husbands, whatever. So that's typically what the pattern is. So they're reading it because they're interested in what that looks like, in understanding
the opposite sex.
Men and understanding people, and that's important. I think one of the biggest things for me was when I read P.S. I Love You by Cecilia Ahern, and I was like, wow, this whole perspective of something, of a life that I've just, that, it's a life that I would never, it's a white middle class British experience that I just would never know looks like at all. But it was an interesting way to experience that by reading the book and thinking, okay, that's something that's, it opened up different parts of my psyche for me to be, so when I am walking around London, I'm not walking around London with a blinker on. There are parts of London that is very normal to other people's lives and Britain and whatnot. And it just helps me open up that sort of compassionate understanding of myself. The same way I could read things like The Kite Runner and The Mountains Echoed, and it speaks about specific life in the Middle East. Again, there were certain things I didn't know about, particular civil wars and dictatorships and occupations and things that happened in that period, in the 70s and in that region, and racial disparities and class wars and all these things. There were so many things I didn't know about. But The Kite Runner had me in tears on the train. I was just like, I have to finish this book, but it's such a beautiful story. And I was just like, wow, people have gone through this, and it helped me understand more. And then that helps me understand when I'm looking at, even coming to today, when we're talking about the migrant crisis and we're talking about all these things, where are people coming from? More and more people need to understand that there are histories and there are stories and there are things that are happening outside, and people are writing about these and putting them in books. And, and we could learn so much from these things.
There's almost no excuse in saying, I really don't understand these days, because you just have to find some time and find out about the other person's perspective. You're very right on saying that that it does expand, and it does expand your consciousness, and it does help you put yourself in other person's shoes. Like somebody, I used to read so much that I had my eyesight was minus 3.5. Here we are. Okay, I did LASIK, by the way. Best decision in my life. But
we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So I started reading, I think, when I was, I don't know, maybe 5 years old. And obviously I started with all these, fairy tale books, and then folk tales, and then it was mythology, everything that was magic. And then, of course, Harry Potter came out, and then all of that genre available in all possible versions of all countries. But yeah, so basically my adolescent life was very much all about fiction. Then at some point there was the romances. I discovered those, and then I discovered detectives. Then adult life. I started working.
Yes.
Forget about it. Mm-hmm. There was a period of time when I was living in Italy, which was for 5 years. And I don't think I read absolutely anything in those 5 years. I mean, of course, I had to learn a new language. I had to get a job, the career progression, like a million things happened. And maybe I also wasn't ready to read in Italian for whatever reason. But it's not an excuse, right? I could read in my language. I could read English.
Yeah, I hear you.
But then since I came here to UK, I've kind of picked it back up because I sensed almost this thirst and this kind of, I don't know, intellectual desert that had formed by me not reading. And just looking back to who I am as a person today, I genuinely credit a massive chunk, I'd say more than 50% of who I am, my personality, to all the books that I read as a kid. My values, my core values are all rooted there. My ideals, my vision, what my dream life would look like, all comes down to those ideas and those images and those stories that I read as a kid, and all those folk tales and all those fairy tales and all those books. So I see how people that don't ever read any sort of fiction or fantasy or anything at all, they just have the perspective of whatever they are living and the closest people around them, and then what media feeds them. So there's no choice in proactively choosing the other worlds and the other ideas and the other stories, which can be so enriching. Literally every single book that you read becomes a part of you if you internalize it, if you read it properly.
I relate, because when I was a journalist for 5 years, before 2019, when I left and began training in what I'm doing, and in those 5 years I didn't read any fiction. Because news was very much black and white. Everything was fact. Is it true? Is it not? Sort of thing. So I was consistently reading nonfiction, but it wasn't like Think and Grow Rich nonfiction. It was like heavy literary nonfiction, sort of things like George Orwell essays.
The system of banking.
There we go. It's just like little things like that. Like, and I just realized that I just wasn't reading things that kind of ignited my fire or my imagination or allowed me to think
They
wider.
put you in a box rather than taking you out of the box.
Yeah. And I think that, and because I wasn't reading like fiction or, well, it doesn't even have to be fantasy, just fiction in general, because I wasn't doing that. I wasn't writing as much fiction. And I kind of shut myself off from all of that. And it wasn't until I began to transition out of journalism that I began to start picking up novels again and started to reconnect with characters that I genuinely missed, because I was like, oh, let me read this again because it reminds me of where I was when I first read it. Of course, you know the story, but you're reading it again. And I think, like I said, this book broke me, but I mean, A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara, the play is out. The play is in London now at the minute. And that was like the first book, that was the first new novel I picked up post-journalism. And I remember walking into Waterstones, the bookstore, and the woman saw me with the book and she was like, good luck. And I looked at her and I said, thank you. And true to form, it's a beautiful book, very, very intense, very powerful. But again, the messages that I learned from it's a long book, it's around 800 pages. But
we like that.
Yeah, but it's a story that it had me hooked at every given point. There were times I wanted to throw the book across the room. There were times where I couldn't sleep because
it's fiction.
It's fiction. And it was just so, very beautiful, tragic, but beautiful.
I miss those moments.
Yeah, and it's just one of those ones, but it's a book that I vowed, me and my best friend, we read it together. And I said, I'm reading this once every 10 years. I can't read this again for now.
Emotionally demanding.
Yeah, because the way that A Little Life is kind of set up, it's set up in decades as well. It follows a group of 4 friends between the ages of 20 and say 50, 60. So it's kind of like, getting them through certain areas of their lives and whatnot. And it's a great exploration into men's mental health and friendship and what that looks like. And I guess it's one of those books that did push me into the area that I'm in now, because it helped me to articulate what I needed to articulate in helping men get through this as well. And so I said, okay, so I read it in my 20s, I'm going to read it in my 30s, I'm going to read it in my 40s, I'm going to read it in my 50s to see if I feel differently.
And do you?
So I read it in my late 20s, so I'm not going to read it in my I'm not going to read it in my 30s just yet. I'll probably give myself a few more years before I
let me know,
pick it up again. But I think one of the best books I'd read in the past few years, for sure.
I was going to ask you, what's the most impactful book that you've ever read?
Based on different stages of my life, but A Little Life was a great one for me, because I was, with my own mental health and well-being, I was struggling, and I needed to find something that, I picked it up not even thinking that that's what it was going to tell me or teach me. It taught me a lot about it. So I needed to know how to communicate, how to articulate myself better, how to see kind of what it was doing to, like, what I was doing to myself, that kind of self-hatred, that sort of like feelings of lack of resilience that I didn't really have in myself, and little things that kind of had kind of been eating away at me,
When was that?
Pardon?
When was that?
When was that? Or when I was reading it, or just over time?
When were you in this emotional state? In this
period? Oh, okay, yeah. So towards, I think it was throughout the time when I was in journalism, because I just had this huge feeling of expectation placed upon me, and then I started.
By who?
By myself, because the thing is, what I've learned over time is that it's not anybody else's kind of jurisdiction. I had to kind of take ownership for that as I grew older and understood what was happening to me. And but by myself, I didn't give myself permission to do so many different things, because growing up, I didn't feel like I had permission to do stuff. I'm the eldest, so a lot of my experiences were very much like, I've got to do this for X, I've got to do this for Y, I've got to make sure that happens, or this happens, and in a West Indian family, you end up just being the third parent, or picking up siblings from school, or cooking for them, or doing whatever.
So it was never about what you wanted.
So it felt like that it was never about what I wanted. When I look back on it, I think to myself, there was ample opportunity for me to say those things, to be like, I need that, I want that. But over time, I kind of reduced that voice in me. So I didn't feel like I gave myself permission to say, this is what I need, this is what I want. So by the time I got to, whatever year it was, 2017, 18, and I'm in journalism, and I can't ask for what I want from work, can't ask for what I want from friendships, can't ask for what I want from family, can't ask for what I want in general. Then I go to therapy, and my therapist asks me, well, what do you want? And I'm like, I don't know. And then I break down in tears, sort of thing. It's actually very, very telling. So when I picked up A Little Life, and it was a very similar storyline, it cut me up, because I was like, wow, I'm not the only one going through this. There must be other people like me going through that.
I suppose, yeah. Do you think there's a lot of situations and a lot of scenarios and cases where men don't get asked, they just get asked of?
Yes.
Oh, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to be a certain way, you have to provide, you have to protect, you have to.
Yeah.
And it's never about, well, what do you really want? And so they don't even think about it, perhaps, don't allow themselves to think about it.
It is, because in the grand scheme, in this kind of capitalistic wheel that we live in this kind of, especially in the UK, and I think even more so in, say, the States or Canada, possibly Australia, whatnot. Europe might be slightly different culturally, but the idea is that what men want doesn't really matter, in a sense. What men need doesn't really matter. They were told that men need to work, men need to provide, and as long as they do those things, they will get everything that they require in life. They'll get the partner, they'll get the family, they'll get the status, they'll get this, that, and the other. They'll get the money, they'll get all of that. So many men are reaching the ages of like 50, 60, and they're only just realizing
that there's more to life.
That there's so much more to life. There's so many connections that they wasted, so much time they wasted, because they look back and they think to themselves, look, I spent 40, 50, 60 hours a week working, and my kids don't talk to me, and I love my family, I really do, but my kids don't talk to me, then that really hurts me. So now whenever I have a conversation with them, it's layered with hurt, and I'm having those kinds of, and that's what a lot of men are having. Or they've had relationships fail, and they're just like, oh, you know, I really loved, that was the love of my life. That was the person for me. That was whatnot. But I didn't let it happen. I didn't let it work because I was so caught up in being financially stable, being a provider, being, you know, financially strong, financially viable. But I kind of had to put that first instead of my kind of like emotional health first.
There's something that I see all the time in men where they postpone everything in life until they feel that they've arrived to that, whatever number it is for them.
I'm guilty of that.
And, you know, from one side, I understand, because also I've been conditioned in the way that you just explained. But I think, you know, from one side, it's factual that if you have resources, you will have choices and you will have more opportunity, for sure. So it's not that we can just discount that sort of argument. But I think the more holistic way to approach it, and the little tweak to make there in order to have the best of the both worlds, is just to say, okay, yes, money is important. It is important to work and to be self-sufficient, and it will help you do many other things and whatever you want to do. But it's not the only thing, and there are different ways of getting there, and you don't have to put the rest of your life on pause whilst you're on the track of getting to whatever number you want. You can build a life that's interconnected and intertwined with everything that you would want. And I guess the core is just asking men, what do you really want from the beginning, from the get-go? What if you had all the money right now? What would you do? How would your life would look like? And then I think it's surprising that when you ask this to people, they tell you things that don't nearly require as much money as they're trying to work towards. Yeah. Like, in the end of the day, if you go deep and you ask, but what activities or what moments in your life are you feeling the happiest when you do them? And what completely drains your energy? And it's like, okay, can we build a life that encompasses as many of those and as little of those? And then it's a completely different life to what they're to the trajectory that they're walking. And that's it.
That is it. And it's a gateway to a whole world within themselves that we've just literally not been able to kind of access or go through, because we just said, look, this is my lot, this is it, this is what I have, and this is all that I can achieve, aspire to, access, all of those things, right? And until you start asking those questions, like you just said, well, you know, if we get down to it, what is it that you want? Who do you want to be? And where do you want to be? And we can then start to ask those real questions, get to the next bit, and to start really engaging with life, because it's a beautiful thing, but so many of us just don't experience it to our full potential.
Don't stop to ask. We're just like going down in the routine. Next goal, next goal, next goal.
My biggest fear is to be in 20 years' time, like really, like not questioning, you know, like just. I think that's kind of what drove me into the ground when I was working in journalism, because I could just see myself just grinding it out, you know, just kind of like, you know, you get a steady job, you've got a steady paycheck, it will probably go up every 2, 3, 4 years, and you're like, okay,
the rat race,
and you're just kind of on this treadmill, on this like wheel that you're
hamster
just going,
wheel.
your hamster, we're just going and going and going, and then you get to like 50, and you know, there was a colleague of mine, and been there for like 50 years, or I want to say 50 years, he hasn't been there that long, probably around 35 years or whatever, and it's like a large chunk of his life, and until he was kind of pushed out of the organization, and it's quite acrimonious, like, you know, and I would hate to think that you've given 35 years, like that's jobs you've turned down, that's like so many different experiences that you didn't have in other organizations that you can, you know, that you didn't kind of build upon, like if you're thinking about career capital and whatnot, there's so many different things that you didn't do, only to be pushed out at that point. And then a lot of men, that's just what I mean by when we look at the transition phases and we look at that liminal moment where you're kind of in the field looking around and it's just really vast and overwhelming and anxiety inducing. And you're like, ooh, which direction do I go? There's no clear path. You just have to just run in one direction and think, okay, I want to go in the one that's most intuitive to me, you know? And I think that's kind of where I sat down and thought, look, I can't do this anymore. I had a breakdown, but you know, and that really took me into a space of like, I needed that. I needed to have that moment of just sadness, of tears, of real just like kind of thinking to myself, do I want to come into work every day and feel this way every day, all the time? Like something is just not adding up. You know, everybody around me looks so happy at work.
Really?
They look so happy. They look like, oh, this is what I'm born to do. This is what I have to do. This is me.
That's rare.
And I was like,
not me.
I was like, well, I know I went into this because I wanted to write full time, and I was writing full time, but I wasn't writing in the way that I wanted to write full time. I wasn't writing the things I wanted to write about. So it just felt like I was wasting away generally.
Can relate.
So yeah.
I was going to ask you, what propelled you to pretty much dedicate your life in educating and helping men? You went through it yourself.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it's so many things. It's like I see what the culture that we live in has done, and what it's done to a lot of the men in my life. I see what it has done to me, see what it's done to the many women and children in my life. And I've like looked around, I've just thought to myself, and I've just observed, just spent most of my time observing how this all fits together for a lot of people. Just being like, look, men don't talk. Men of a certain age anyway act a particular way towards their family, towards their partners, towards life. They have a very particular outlook. This idea that we can't change, and I don't think it's that we can't.
Whose idea is that?
This kind of, if we look at, if we take, for example, modern politics today, right? And just, if you just even have these, if we talk about the Matt Hancock situation, right? If you're familiar, our former health secretary during COVID, and he just
had a second life,
had a completely second life. And you know what? And there was this whole thing with the affair and all the stuff that was going on. Then he goes on to, I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. He starts to create this persona for himself that is trying to put him back in the good graces of the British public, of the eye of the British public. And when I look at that, and I look at that kind of obvious act of trying to seek retribution, but in a not very genuine way.
Why is that even necessary?
Because it's necessary for him, because so that he can kind of progress in the way that he wants to progress. He wants to be able to do things without the scrutiny of the British public on his back. He wants to be able to do all of those things. But when you start doing those things without the real intention and the real genuinity and real authenticity to say, look, I'm genuinely sorry about what was going on within COVID. I was under particular pressure, I was under particular thing, doesn't excuse it, but this is exactly what happened and this is why, and you just have to accept that not everyone's going to take that apology and whatnot. The way that he kind of went about that apology was very, very
dismissive.
It was just very inauthentic. It was just very inauthentic. So when you start having men who are like, they say they want to change, but with their actions aren't doing it, then that's where the kind of, well, we call it incongruence lies, because you're not doing what you're saying that you want to do.
I've seen that many times.
Yeah.
Why?
You probably would have.
Why does that happen? Did they not want to?
And it's what is accepted and what is acceptable. I suppose, it can be, if no one's holding you accountable, you're just falling into the same patterns over and over and over again. My whole thing is that you have choices to make and you've got to take responsibility for those choices. If you want meaningful and actionable change, you have to take responsibility for that. And then, obviously you got to take the rubbish that comes with it.
Yeah.
Be like, okay, cool, I did that. Now let me actively go in the process of making meaningful and actionable change, become the person that I know that I am and I know that I'm supposed to be, But, a lot of the time in movement, it becomes a performance some of the time. So, because that's what masculinity is. It is a performance that we're trying to uphold for ourselves each and every day because of this acceptance that we're trying to get from other men. Not necessarily, because it's other men that will allow us access to other things and allow us access to masculinity.
What is true masculinity?
I have no clue. And I think because I look at it, everybody has their own definitions, but I look at true masculinity as compassion, as purposefulness, as empathy and understanding, as drive, I do look at it as just having a standard for yourself. And if you have a standard for yourself and the way that you live your life and the way that you operate and move, you can create some beautiful things and some beautiful moments in that kind of.
I would even say I wouldn't even attribute all of those things to masculinity. I would just say to humanity, because I can relate to all of those.
Exactly why I said I don't know.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't, there are particular elements that come with a masculine nature and a feminine nature, right? And I think that we all have access to those areas. Some over-index in some over-index in others. But I think, and a lot of it is to do with socialization as well. But I do think that some of the core masculine qualities, such as, the physical strength stuff, the drive and the direction and the courage, all of that stuff is important, but it means nothing unless we have the compassion, unless we have the inner love, the nurturing, unless we, if we don't have that.
The concept of the peaceful warrior almost.
There we go.
Yeah, absolutely.
The warrior in the garden, that kind of stuff.
Completely agree with you. You mentioned purpose, which is pretty much what this podcast is built around. So what is your purpose? I'm
still getting used to being able to articulate that.
The tough one.
Because I'm like, is it fake to start talking about this is my purpose? This is the thing. How do you know that your purpose changes all the time? Does it not? And all this. So these are the questions I have in my mind. I do think my purpose is to speak to the hearts of men and boys, to allow them to feel that there's more. It's not always going to be readily picked up and readily kind of accepted, especially from other men, because there are men out there on the internet who speak to men's pain points in the way that a lot of men are conditioned to take ideas from men. That whole warrior kind of attack.
Andrew Tate.
Okay. And it's that, what I mean? I think even that, and there's, if you look at the Joe Rogans and you look at the Jordan Petersons and whatnot, they have messages which attract a lot of men, because a lot of men are used to hearing messages in that way. But they won't necessarily but we don't see people taking things like from Russel Brand in the same way. Russel Brand talks about quite high level stuff, but he talks about it and he is very clear and he is very direct and he is all these things, but he talks about it from a place of love. He does talk about it from a place of enlightenment, and just a different kind of energy that comes behind what he's saying. But I noticed that he doesn't get blown up in the same way as the others do, because of the way that they are directing it, and they're taking a lot of the compassion and the empathy out of what they say, which means it cuts through as a talking point.
I find Jordan Peterson, he's quite an emotional person as well.
Yeah, it pains him a lot. A lot of what he says, I feel it pains him a lot. And I'm not 100% sure how much to believe.
Really?
Sometimes, because it's just like he's just talking sometimes, and it's just like it just kind of leaks out sort of thing. And I'm like, can you not just say the thing without crying? Because sometimes they're like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, what did I see the video the other day? And it was like, somebody talked about religion with him. And I think he said that somebody came up to him and said, oh, could he be a rabbi? He could be his rabbi. And then I'm paraphrasing because I was watching. And then he started to well up, and they didn't say could he be his rabbi, they said, oh, you're like a rabbi, you're like this and the other. And it's not to admonish him for crying, but it's also it just makes me question
the genuinity.
When do you choose to cry? When do you choose to, because it's always when he's being questioned about something as a challenge that he then and usually by other men, that he then brings it then brings that kind of out to him. I don't know whether it's subconscious or whether it's something to kind of bring the audience in or whatever, but it does make me question. But I know that he's I don't know him obviously, but I look at these videos and I see that he's a very emotional man. But the one thing I don't agree with is that he doesn't take responsibility for what he's saying sometimes, and the way that other people interpret what he's saying.
Can you take responsibility for the way other people interpret what you say?
Not that you can. I feel like it's more you can say, I understand why what I've said can be misconstrued in this way.
Can.
Exactly. But you should be able to say that. He like from what I've seen anyway, he just blanketly doesn't.
Interesting.
And I just found that right. And I find that quite like, it'd be nice if you could just say, like, he says he's not responsible for what people take and what they kind of believe from what he's saying. And I'm just like, okay, that's fair. But at the same time, acknowledge that it does play a part in a lot of these conversations as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think, at least to me, it's a logical truth that whatever we say, if we say it in the presence of somebody else or in a medium that can be transferred to somebody else, it will impact other people, period. However, can we be responsible about how other people take it or perceive it? I don't think so. I don't think we should either, because that would mean me trying to take responsibility for the mindset and the evolution and all of the life's journey that made somebody perceive life the way that they did, and that's ridiculous. I think it was even the spiritual teacher Ram Dass. He was saying that his guru told him that, you know, if I'm upset, that's my problem.
For sure.
If I'm angry, that's my problem.
For sure.
And that brings us back to personal responsibility, which is something that the topic that I really love, because it's so empowering. You know, that it's like one coin, right? It has two sides. On one side, it can feel heavy. Yeah. And overwhelming, but on the other side, it's all empowering.
No, for sure. Yeah. I guess it's acknowledging the part you play. I think that's where
the interconnectedness.
That's where I find I have a to and fro thing. And but what you're saying actually, kind of made me reflect a little bit on that, because I think that is important to just, you know, think about the part you play and then, you know, speak candidly about that and then kind of move forward.
Just
what you're
let
saying.
It go, yeah.
Yeah, because if you have a clear message and a clear thing that you're saying, and then, you know, and what you've said, it's been taken out of context and misconstrued in whatever way. I do then think it would be my responsibility to clarify that and then continue with your, you know, with your day or with your work or whatnot. That's the way I look at it. Because I before, you know, he became prolific in this way, I do love the stuff he talks about with mysticism and symbols and you know, his conversations on psychology and whatnot. And I've always said he's brilliant thinker, a brilliant speaker, and I've always been like, wow. But when it comes into things that can create quite emotional harm for a lot of people and not actually considering that, I do think it becomes quite a bit of a challenge to ourselves as people who speak on these particular topics and whatnot, to be able to look back and think, actually, I believe what I'm saying, but I need to figure out a way to communicate that and not be kind of misconstrued again. Going forward. Again, that's probably just my own, the way my ethic works, I suppose. Some people, you know, there are people who just don't care about the conflict, who don't care about that. I just think that if we are being platformed, then I do think it's important that we find a way to not intentionally harm people. For
sure. I definitely agree with that. But even from my experience with the podcast, it's crazy how the same episode or same moment will deliver completely different messages to different people. And the world is so big and people are so different. And even when I think, you know, what I mean with this is super clear, right? To me, it will be a completely different thing for somebody else. It's fascinating.
Get somebody at the right time, the wrong time, in the wrong emotional state, on the wrong day.
And again, this is where I think people need to just take their personal responsibility. And this might be a bit controversial, but talking about this whole kind of cancel culture and like certain individuals in the media that have been, you know, deplatformed, sometimes banned, whatever. I am a little bit allergic to people putting everything in one cauldron. So for example, if a person or an artist will have been, you know, creating some amazing things for decades, for years, and then, you know, they do something out of line and then it gets also taken out of the context and like built up even more, and then people just turn their backs on other people. And okay, that's kind of an extreme, right? But even say in case of Jordan Peterson, right? Not that I overconsume his media, I just, you know, I see some clips, I see that he's a brilliant speaker, brilliant thinker, can resonate with a lot of things. Some I don't. And sometimes, you know, there's clips will come and I'm like, I'm not sure about this. But the next, you know, I don't hold these grudges. I don't immediately feel the need to be like, cancel. I don't like you anymore. I don't believe you anymore because you said one thing that I don't agree with. We're so complex. We change all the time. Why would I hold somebody accountable in my mind to the point where I control them in my mind. So if they make a step out of line where I disagree, then immediately I'm against it. You see what I mean? I think that's just so unnecessary in one word.
I hear you. Yeah, and it's a tricky line to tread, isn't it? Because if everybody takes personal responsibility for themselves, then everybody has the right to make whatever decision is right for them in that way. I think that, as Bruce Lee says, take what's useful and leave what's not. And I think that's just kind of
fantastic.
I think that's kind of where it goes, because there's some things I watch and I'm just like, I don't agree with any of this. However, there's a point that some people have made, and I'm like, that's something for me to think about. How could I deliver that in a way that's different to what they're saying? And it just leaves me to meditate on stuff, Yeah, take what's useful and leave what's not.
100%.
Yeah.
Live by that.
Yeah.
I recently had a conversation with somebody, and we were talking about coaches and speakers and mentors. And they were the skeptic type, and they were like, people that don't quite believe in that whole profession. And I was saying, I don't really care about checking people's credentials. I don't really care about,
You were saying that.
I was saying that, getting deep into their history. If I see somebody speak on stage, I walk by and I hear a message. If I, see a post-it, if I hear a song on a radio or something, and that message has an impact on me, job done. I'll give thanks to that and onwards I move. I don't I don't have any sort of desire to spend my time, or to me it is a time waste, in going deep into the research of that person to check if they were authorized or they had the credentials to even make a statement like that. I don't care. It gave something to me. It inspired me. It motivated me. Great. Thanks.
Yeah. I think lived experience is important. My view on credentials has always been that I've always said that I think in order for people to operate safely with other people, I think some form of training, for me to have my own security in that was important. So, because a lot of people were always like, well, I've not had any training as a coach and I don't need any and all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, that's fine for you. For me, I need to be able to know how to work with different kinds of people that come in and be conscious or aware of, say, a modality that I need to use or something, or code of practice, just for myself, just to give myself that sort of, like, I want to say safety net, but kind of just like a foundation for me to just be like, okay, that's and I understand that I can kind of pick and choose how I move forward in that space. I think that a lot of people were going with people, therapists, coaches, guides, or whatever, who weren't trained, and it can put a lot of people at harm and at risk. Yeah, just emotional risk, and and there were so many people that I spoke to just around, especially black men. And I said, whether you're qualified or not, to be fair, but I was like, so did you go to therapy, or have you been to therapy? Like, I went therapy once and had a very bad experience, so I didn't go again. Had a coach once, very bad experience, so I've never gone again. It's taken me a while to get back into going. A lot of other men have just been like, I didn't trust people. I didn't trust going with somebody, So if you're not for me, I was just like, if I'm not trained on how to deal with that as a client, or as somebody, or like a difficult client, or somebody who is struggling with trust, and and then I'm kind of trying to be that coach who's like very impact driven, and you got to get up by, pull up by your bootstraps and get out and whatnot. It might not work. It might not be helpful for that person. So for me, it's just trying to understand how I could be of the most use, how I could be the most help to somebody. And I think just for me, I just had to kind of have the training in some way, so that, so I know the rules, so I know I know how to kind of like make them my own. If that makes any sense. Absolutely. But I always look at where people are coming from. And for me, based on my own kind of, personal and emotional makeup, I'm like, if I vibe with the person, and then I will at least give it a go, Some people need to know that somebody's had the experience or whatnot. So I guess it really just depends on everybody's personal history and they're like,
and once again, the world is amazing because it's so big and it's beautiful.
And you're right. And you're like what you said, if I'm talking and somebody is like, I actually just really vibe with what this person's saying, let me speak to them and talk to them, right? That's where the energy is. That's the energy you connected with. The same energy as somebody saying, I really do not like this what you're saying, so I won't connect with it,
Yeah, actually you said it right. It's down to intuition, I guess. It's not in my case, it's not allowing my kind of conscious mind to overthink things. It's just going with the gut feeling.
And I think we don't trust it enough.
Which is another topic.
A completely different topic.
So I wanted to ask you, you mentioned you had a breakdown. And what, in your experience from working with men, is the biggest threat to man's mental health at the moment?
What's the biggest threat to men's mental? The first thing that I always think to myself, the first thing that comes to your mind is the answer.
What was the
first thing that came to my mind was themselves. We are the biggest threat to ourselves. We are the biggest threat to our mental health. We are the biggest threat to other men's mental health, and it's a cycle that needs to be broken. But I would say that a lot of the obstacles that I work with are built around feelings of worth, shame, and imperfection. These are pretty much the three obstacles that a lot of men.
What is the shame about?
So masculine shame tends to look at the areas of life that you're not kind of living up to the true, the carbon copy ideas of what it means to be a man. So in my book, I speak around 6 myths that a real man is expected to have. Real men aren't meant to be vulnerable. Real men are fearless, go-getters. Real men have no worries about their bodies. Real men don't need to worry about self-love. Real men are super successful around that. And real men don't cry. And those are, if you look at that idea of what it means to be a real man, you don't live up to those things, it then implies that you're not a man or a real man. It means that you are not worthy of being accepted into that exclusive club of masculinity, which is why masculinity is so fragile. Because as soon as you begin to exhibit things that just aren't necessarily deemed to be 100% acceptable, 100% like what other men are doing, then you are kind of outcast or pushed. So there was an example that somebody said to me about their husband. Their husband is a doctor, did all the things, got all the grades, went to uni, became the doctor. But obviously at uni now, he's a white middle class man. Uni, played rugby. So he made rugby friends, and now they're all kind of like in various professions or whatnot, various high-powered, high-performing professions. So they're all in this group chat. And this man, knowing, married to his wife, and his wife does a lot of work in the area of diversity and inclusion, and they have daughters, and they so he's aware of some of the language around intersectionality and whatnot. So he's learning, as you would, because you're with your family and you want to make sure that your family's safe and protected and secure and emotionally well. So now he's in this group chat, and it's in this men's group chat, and they're all there. They've known each other for years, whatever. People start putting in jokes about women, about other ethnicities, maybe just inappropriate things, which this man finds uncomfortable. Because he's like, he sees it, doesn't say anything for a while, but then when something comes up again, he's like, I'm going to say something. There's something. There's, guys, this is not the place. Like, can we not make jokes about that? That's not what
we stand for.
That's not what we stand for. At least that's not what I think we stand for. Nobody said anything. There was silence in the group chat. And he's thinking, this is weird.
New group chat.
This is weird. Nobody's saying anything. Like, we usually speak every day. No one's saying anything. Only to find exactly what he said. He's speaking to somebody else, like, that's in the group, like later, only to find out that there's another group chat was made and he was excluded from it because he decided to say, no, that is some BS. And they all decided that, fine, well, there is usually a leader, but, that person decided, fine, we're not going to include you in our fun. That's just like a modern day example.
Well, I know what I think about that, which is, great, now you know that you need new friends.
Exactly.
That was not your tribe.
That was not your tribe. But then again, then men have a friend problem, a making friends issue, because a lot of those personal relationships are sacrificed as they, grow into relationships, as they grow into marriages. And, there's this whole culture and this whole idea of, when when a male friend gets married, we're losing them. We're not,
But I think it goes both ways.
I know it's this whole it's this whole idea. It's just like, oh, we're gonna lose you, man. Like you're no longer X, Y, and Z. But these men have responsibilities. They now have their family to look after. They can't be out every week. They can't be out. Whatnot.
Can I say something though?
Yeah.
Immediately, what comes to my mind is, well, why are you saying that you are losing him? Are the things that your friendship is built around are incompatible with marriage? So what the hell are they?
There you go. There you go. And this is why a lot of men who get married and start to build their families, because they tend to become friends with other married men who are usually the husbands of typically their wives. So they become that kind of family. They're friends until their friends get married or whatever, or move into a different transition in life. It becomes it's very challenging when you're now in a different stage of life and your friends who aren't, and they're in a different mentality completely. Again, their lifestyle is incompatible with yours. You can't be out every night. You can't be out every weekend. You've got to take your kids to X, Y, and Z. You've got to be there for your wife. You've got to be able to, spend time with your family. You're building
Absolutely.
a family, you're building a lifestyle. You can't do that. I guess the question is around, it's that whole idea around the empathy and the compassion and, building relationships and supporting and sustaining relationships to make sure that you should still be able to maintain and hold those friendships closely and have your family. One should not sacrifice for the other, but things shift. I've got friends who are married recently in the past 2 to 3 years, and I don't see them as often as I used to, but we still keep in contact, and I still make sure that I make time to chat to them and kind of, be there for them. And they make sure that they make time for me in kind, but just not in the same way that we used to, because they have responsibilities that they need to, their priorities are different. And that's just the nature of maturity and growing up and being able to understand that.
I 100% agree with you. And my closest friends, none of them live in this country. I don't have the privilege or luxury of seeing them every month, even every other month. So I see them a couple of times a year, and that's amazing. But we, have a call every other day. And that's because obviously I've lived in different countries. But the same thing happens, of course, when you go into adulthood. You go through different stages of life and your priorities shift. But I think friendship is such an integral and crucial part of your life. It's irreplaceable. You have to make time for it.
It is the heartbeat of relationships.
It is.
Because you actively choose.
You've picked those people.
And they pick you. And that's a beautiful thing. Yeah. And my friend, Max Dickens, he wrote this book called Billy No Mates. And he realized that he was going to propose to his girlfriend, his now wife. And he realized he didn't have a best man. He couldn't, and he was racking his brain to think who could be his best man. And he looked around and he had no discernible, concrete male friendships, and that stunned him. And he's like, he was in his mid-30s. He's like, I have no male friends. Who's going to be my best man? Who's going to be in my?
Were they all female friends?
So when he went to pick out the ring for his fiancée, my wife, it was 2 female friends that came with him, and they were like, so who's going to be your best man? And he's like, and he was just stunned for a while. He's like, oh yeah, I'll think about it. Yeah, when he thought about it, and he went and and he found that he went on Google, and
he found a best man on Google.
A lot of men were like, he said there's a lot of the big trending searches were, help, I don't have a best man. Who can be my best man? Some people are like, I'm going to try and ask somebody from work.
Wow.
Or can it just be my dog?
Oh,
things like that.
Those levels.
I don't it's literally, and we laugh because it's like, it's so bizarre, but that level of sadness to the fact that you don't have any close friendships that are male that could fit that position. And I know that we're living in a time where, you can have a female best man or best person, doesn't really make a difference. But what I'm saying is that the point of, when we're looking inside this structure of what this looks like, it's like, well, who are they? And so many men go through life without any deep, close connections or friendships. And then we wonder why there's a huge loneliness problem among men. Because like the man I said in the group chat.
The scales are unbalanced. The only thing that's coming up to my mind when you say this is, 100% of their time must have been dedicated to something completely else, leaving nothing to the friendships. Or, okay, he had the female friendship.
Yeah. And I think that we have this, there's this analogy of them, men's relationships are side by side, not face to face. That they're playing football, they're playing computer games, they're side by side at a football match. They're never looking at each other. They're not being able to be like,
interesting.
It's
exactly the opposite with women.
Women, yeah. And I think even Jane Fonda, from what's the show called? It's on Netflix anyway. But Jane Fonda, and there's a group of them. I've forgotten all of their names, but Jane Fonda's like a part of that group, and they're in their 80s, and they're talking about like female friendships, and they're just like, for their friendships to sustain for so long, it allows them to live for so long, because they have that friendship, they have that community, and a lot of women have that. Not to say all, because some women experience very similar things. Who's going to be in my bridal party? Like, all that, there's a lot of shame that comes with a lot of that, because you're like, well, I should have X, I should be able to Y. A lot of men don't have that community of brotherhood who actively care for one another to see them through to the next phase of life. I'm watching a show called A Million Little Things right now, and it's actually, and I saw it because there's a video which started talking about male friendships and the like. But the idea of the story is that four male friends from Boston, their whole lives are turned upside down when one of those friends takes his life, and all of them are going through their own crap in life. But I think during that first season, it was really unpacking, just like, what do we really know about one another? We're friends, but we don't know. We think we know one another, as in like we know what we're like, we know what we want for birthdays and kind of stuff, but we don't know what is going on. We didn't know that one of them was attempting to overdose before he got the call that his friend had died. We didn't know that. Yeah, we didn't know that one had just been given the all clear for remission from cancer. We just didn't know that one was having an affair and he was really unhappy in his relationship. You know what I mean? Like they didn't know. Can I ask you
something? Do you guys just call and say, "Hey, so how are you?"
My friends, me and my friends. Yeah. I will. I will call my friends, but again, I have to make that standard for myself to say, I want friends like this, and I want friends that I can call up to ask how they are. I want friends that I can kind of impromptu meet. And I want friends that if I'm going through something, I know that I'm supported and safe. However, in the main, and prior to that, especially in that time when I was talking about when I was going through like really dark time at work and in life and whatnot, no, I didn't have friends like that. I had the friendships that I thought I had, that I thought were the best kinds of friendships, were the ones that were only talking about my successes, that only talking about what I had to offer, only very surface level, very materialistic. Nobody ever asked me how I felt about something, what my concerns are, what my worries were, and how they can help me through that. There was never any conversations about and like even reciprocated in that way. I found that a lot of those relationships, I didn't know the people that I was with. I thought I did, but I didn't really know.
And I think this really goes back to knowing your values and connecting with people that share those values.
For sure. And I had to do all of that, to do a lot of my own value work, figure out what my values were. Yeah. And again, when I talked about the group chat situation, a lot of men just want to be within a group because safety in numbers. That's just a biological surety.
There's a price to pay for that, though.
Right.
And safety, there's a time when you need to make a choice.
And there is, for sure, which is the existential ideas. Like for me, you have to be able to make the choice and take responsibility for that choice. And I took a step out of certain friendships, and I said, you know what, these are not the friends that I want, and I'm prepared to be alone while I figure out what friendships I'm looking for and what I need.
Yeah,
I'm prepared to not be in those numbers and be unsafe and be unmoored in a sense. Prepared to do that.
That's the price you have to pay.
Because I want to have friends who are there for me, and I want to have friends who I know that in 30 years' time, I'm still calling. In 50 years' time, that I'm still calling and berating, like, or whatever. And we're just like, debating and still kind of having love for one another.
Yeah.
I've always felt that, you know what I mean? So there we are.
Alex, if I asked you to share with me 3 of the most impactful life lessons that you've picked over the years, what would you share?
The first thing is that, for me anyway, is that I have responsibility for myself. I'm not responsible for other people's actions, and I'm not necessarily responsible for the way people act towards me. I can only be responsible for how I present myself in those moments. So responsibility. I guess it's that kind of conversation that what I said earlier about take what's good and leave what's unnecessary. I think that's the second thing that I've always, take what's useful, and leave what's not. That's kind of how I've kind of guided my life, really. And I think the final thing is, I don't know how to put this into a concise sentence, but once you find your values, you find your purpose. Once you find your purpose, you have that fire for living. So I guess the thing is find your values and hone in on them. You know, they reshift and they redefine each time, but once you find them, you can kind of like get more and more specific as you get in.
Live by them.
And that's a guiding route for my life.
Powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
When I was reading your website, first of all, resonated on so many levels.
Okay.
But you said that in your book, you also talk about the habits and practices that are necessary to lead a fulfilling life. Could you share some of those, please?
Reflection. I think one habit is, making sure that you're journaling, or find some way to do it, because not everybody likes to journal. I think, again, it feeds back to the reading conversation. I mean, I think that a lot of people think, I think I got a message recently that was like, how do you achieve success in journaling? And I think the question I asked was, there
is none.
That all depends on what you define as success, and why do you need to be successful in journaling? And he was like,
show up.
I was like, just show up. So my book is quite reflective. There are loads of questions that I'm asking myself in the book, which I hope and has done helps people to ask themselves a question. So I think reflect is important. These are just core actions. There's reflect, listen, embark on having conversations and listening during the conversation, actively listening. And one of the core things of actively listening is repeating what somebody says back to them to show that you are engaging with what they're saying and then responding to that. And a lot of men try to think about what we're going to say next, rather than actually responding to what is being said. Which is like, sometimes you can have a conversation with certain people and they're thinking, you can see that they're thinking about what you're saying. And you've asked them something in what you've said. And they'll come back, sorry, say that again? And you're like, okay. And then you're trying to figure out what you said to kind of go back so that they can think. Yeah. But again, so I guess it's the active listening stuff and trying to be present. I'll just say, listen and reflect. I think some of those are the two practices I would say for men to go about. Because when we listen and we reflect with ourselves and we reflect with others, I think both of these things can be done with other people and with ourselves. So if we listen to ourselves, we can actually know whether that friendship is right, that relationship is right, or whatnot, that job is right.
All of that cultivates awareness.
Yeah, exactly. So all of that stuff, listening to yourself allows you to then be aware of what's going on. And reflecting on that allows you to then be able to kind of articulate what is happening.
Yeah, and also pick and choose what's in your life, what's necessary, what's not necessary anymore.
Exactly. And, I've always said that, men can be quite reactive, but not responsive. It's not like, sometimes just take a step back and just say, okay.
Relax.
It's like take a step back. Am I actually being attacked here? Am I gonna respond? Am I responding correctly and rightly to this moment?
Yes, because they go into this reactiveness. I gotta act. I gotta do this.
Gotta do that. Someone says, I'm really hurting or whatnot, and
you gotta fix this. You can do this. You can do that.
You can do that. Okay, let's actually start with
just listen,
compassion and empathy first. But then these are all skills that need to be built. So.
Absolutely. And valuable point, these are skills, and I think they need to be branded as skills, and instead of
not personalities,
that's soft or something like that.
I think, and not personalities as well.
Yeah.
When people say, I'm an empath, okay, I have strong empathic values and a strong empathic nature. Your whole identity shouldn't be that. That's not your whole identity.
100%.
Because there will be days when you cannot be empathetic.
Yes.
And that is absolutely fine. Just accept that. That's okay.
Agree.
But now if you say I'm an empath and then there's one day you're not empathetic, you completely break down, because now it's your whole identity shattered. Let's be easy with ourselves.
Amen. Alex, I like to wrap it up with a beautiful question, which is, what will be your recipe for happiness?
My recipe for happiness? I think I'll just go with the 3 values from my book, which is love, belonging, and connection. Those 3 things constitute to quite a happy life.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Hello, friends. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe and share it with someone. I would love to hear your feedback and suggestions as to what guests you would like to see on the show next. See you next week.